Good morning, Facebook community. Welcome to the revamping of Scenic Perspectives, a virtual hike offered by Greenbelt at Home. My name is Angel Ellers, and I am an environmental educator with New York City Parks out of the Greenbelt on Staten Island. Today, myself and my co-educator, Christopher Ricker, will be sharing with you a really beautiful scenic perspective brought to you from a kind of secret spot off of some of the better known trails near the multi-purpose trail. We'll get to the exact location soon, but I did want to just show for a few moments as we're waiting for people to sign on some of the beautiful sights that I see right now. And maybe you'll know where we are. And I can tell already from a few of the comments put in the comments section that some people know exactly where we are. What we're looking at here is St. Andrew's Episcopalian Church, which dates back to one of the very first congregations in 1708, I believe. This church and this cemetery hold very historical significance to Staten Island, with lots of rich and important history on this land. And this land is a neighbor to the Greenbelt, and that's how we found ourselves out here today. And with that, I think we'll get started. That was a really great way to start off this program. Again, thank you all for joining us. If you're tuning in for the first time, my name is Angel Ellers, an environmental educator with New York City Parks out of the Greenbelt. And today you are tuning into a Greenbelt at Home program, a virtual Scenic Perspectives run by myself and my co-educator Christopher Ricker, who we'll meet up with in just a moment. Just a little bit of background on our program here. We tend to take people on little hikes of short segments throughout the Greenbelt that focus not only on the natural history, but also the cultural history and the social history of these areas. And since we are talking about the importance of the land and all of the history of the people who have lived here, we'll start off by sharing our acknowledgement that this land that we love and care for and steward in our own ways is in fact the ancestral homeland of the Lenape people who lived here through the Eastern Woodland time period until European colonization in the 1700s. And this land does remember them and their time spent here, as do we, as we honor them and their memory of their history here on Aquahanga Monocnong through our programming and our always searching for more information to share with the public about what life was like then, and even into where we can find Lenape people today. So with that, we are going to join up with Christopher Ricker, who is right here. Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Good morning. Hi, Angel. Good morning, everyone out there in Facebook land. I'm super excited that Angel and I can return for our second season of Scenic Perspectives. And sometimes we just have to chill and see what's going on around us, because right up in that tree we see some blue jays sauntering and strutting about. Again, blue jays are one of the species here in the Greenbelt that we can find year round. There's 2 of them now up in that tree. And I can see a third one sort of down the road a little bit. 2 actually down the road a little bit.
And as we look down the road, we get a pretty good clue of where we are again. And like I said, we are right next to St. Andrew's Church, and we are about to enter Tourette Park. Specifically, this trail is the multi-purpose trail, where all different sorts of park patrons are welcome to come and coexist all together, from bike riders to pedestrians to dog walkers and everyone.
And I think I can speak for both Angel and I when I say every time we come out to run an in-person or virtual program, we do a lot of research. We look into historical journals and documents and articles written by Greenbelt and museum educators new and old to make sure that we are painting the most accurate picture of Greenbelt and Staten Island's history. And so it was super exciting when we started to uncover some of the historical components of this area and this section of Tourette Park in the Greenbelt. Because now we're looking down this road and this multi-purpose trail, which is a trail designed, as Angel mentioned, for bikes and pedestrians and strollers and dog walkers. But this section of the Greenbelt, both the multi-purpose trail and the smaller trail we're going to go on the left, is also built on the skeleton of Old Mills Road. And Old Mill Road was a carriage road that connected the community around St. Andrew's Church and Richmond Town to New Springville via a carriage road that meandered along the side of Richmond Creek up into the woodlands of what's Tourette today, and eventually making its way towards Field of Dreams, where the model airplane fields and ball fields currently are, so that folks, family, can bring their produce to market, to bring resources and materials back to this part of the island from New Springville, which was then connected to other sections of Staten Island. So as we move along today, we're going to be walking in the footsteps of the British Army, the rebels, further industry that was developed when Richmond Creek was a big estuary used for trade. And of course, all of that, as Angel mentioned, was built on top of the ancestral homeland of the Lenape. So we were super excited to move through the pages of history today alongside you.
So we are at the junction of where we are going to make a left turn, and I believe some people have definitely been out here. This is not a mapped or a marked trail, but we are going to take a left off of the multi-purpose trail right at the very beginning of this trail. Generally, we don't encourage people to do this because marked and mapped trails are the ones that the Parks Department and the Greenbelt Conservancy are prioritizing to keep nice and safe and accessible to people and hikers. So what's happening here is that this has been a very well-worn trail, and we'll see exactly why. It's really quite beautiful. There are views of habitats and ecosystems that are not necessarily very common inside the Greenbelt, and so we understand why people came down here. We're in the current process in partnership with New York City Parks to create a brand new map of all of our trails, which will include kind of the surrounding areas as well. And so this here trail is actually going to become something called an unnamed but official trail, which means that you're welcome to come and venture Of course, be careful, but enjoy the kind of off the beaten path feel that you can find back here.
So I stopped here over this tree because when Angel and I first came out here to scout, the first thing I noticed was this tree coming along as we were coming along the trail, and in my brain I instantly thought eastern cottonwood. And I had to check in with a botanist friend just to make sure my ID was correct, because it's always great to make sure that you're giving out accurate scientific information. And after taking some photos of the bark, looking at the structure, and thinking about the habitat and sort of the ecosystem that this organism, this tree, is living within, I was right. It was an eastern cottonwood, which is one of the several species of trees that really like to live on riverbanks in wet habitat with sandy substrate, right? So the soil here is super sandy. There's quite a bit of organic matter mixed within that sand before you hit bedrock. And so when you're on the side of rivers and lakes and estuaries like Richmond Creek, you'll find the eastern cottonwood here. It helps to stabilize the bank, hold up the earth, so that as this salt marsh and these waters fluctuate year after year with different succession, they're keeping the earth where it is, and they're enduring those changes of season and changes in the environment. Both the Lenape and early European settlers also utilized some of the inside of the bark and cottonwood bark for different medicinal purposes as well.
And I feel like the fact that this here cottonwood is half standing and half fallen is really a testament to that ground stabilization effort that these trees are always kind of after, because even after half of this tree has kind of given up and fallen down, its roots are still very much secure and anchored in the soil, still doing exactly what this tree is meant to do. And it's also simultaneously providing food sources and habitat still for animals in this area and insects. Here we can see some pretty beautiful examples of grapevine tendrils that are trying to spread by wrapping themselves around the stalks of the Phragmite plants. It's a way that most all vines travel and ensure that they spread themselves to further parts of the landscape. And we'll see no shortage of vines in this area. We have many to choose from talking about here. We'll stop at multiple points. But what I can see right now that I'd love to point out that maybe people are realizing is that some of these vines that are growing up the trees don't seem to be connected to the ground anymore, right? They seem like they've been cut. And so with very hardy, woody, invasive plant vines such as bittersweet and honeysuckle, and even native plant vines like grapevines and poison ivy, they can put a lot of stress on trees that are maybe younger trees still trying to make their way in the world. And if all of these vines are kind of taking their sunlight or taking their energy in whatever way, then it can be really hard for them. So that's just a way that we can come out and help steward this land by returning the balance. I stopped to show you the highway that these squirrels are performing their mating dances on.
It's so cool to see wildlife interacting and doing what they would normally, even in our presence. Because a lot of times when we think about play and enrichment, we think about humans and how important those social interactions are. But to be able to see the cognitive thought in these gray squirrels that are playing, roughhousing, maybe one really just said something inappropriate to the other and they're duking it out. Whatever's going on, it's clearly an experience that they're having and enriching their lives here in the Greenbelt.
That hairy rope, as many people out there may know, is the older woodier vine portion of the poison ivy plant that you should be careful of, because even in winter, when you can't see the leaves of the plant that usually are dead giveaways, that you should be careful around them. The oils can still be transferred from the living hairy tendrils on the vines. And I had mentioned the native grapevines as well. And here's a really nice example of them. They're very strong. And as we watch the squirrels jump back and forth between those two trees, and just hearing Chris talk about the importance of play within animals and creatures in general, it reminds me of the fact that, a very simple fact, that these animals live here. This is their home, that we're visitors on this landscape. And so when we're blessed with one of those really intimate moments to really just watch them and observe them, it's really a very special time. So I like to try sometimes to be really, really quiet when I'm hiking, just to keep my presence not so known to the animals, so they can feel comfortable to continue to live life as they would without me there. And as Chris had mentioned earlier, he had mentioned the Richmond Creek, which we are walking to the right of at this moment. And we can tell by this landscape and the plants that are here that there is water to the left of us. And we know that because this plant that we're looking at, that's actually quite beautiful, standing tall, very limber in the wind, with their kind of fluffy heads poking out the top, is called Phragmite. It's a reed plant. It likes to grow in wet and marshy conditions. So wherever you see them, you know that that is near water. What do you see, Chris?
So I'm looking down on this trail as we're walking, and I've noticed along the way some dog tracks, some human tracks, And then suddenly I looked down and saw sort of a hoof print with two toes, very ungulate-like. And so I'm thinking to myself, what has a hoof and lives in the Greenbelt?
Oh, I know.
I'm sure you know, and maybe some folks at home know as well. So feel free as we're going along in the chat to throw in anything that you might identify and know as we're going along so that we can all learn together.
I'll give you all a little hint. So Chris is on the right side of the screen with that trail. We're walking along the established trail. But to the left here, I can also see a trail that was not made by humans, but made by probably that same large ungulate of a mammal. And this is one of their trails. If anybody has any idea, let us know who it is. We might even encounter them if we follow these tracks down this trail. And if I look right up there, I can actually see that elevated land, this sort of plateau right in front of us, is the multi-purpose trail right in front of us. But we are going to stay left. Be careful on these uneven terrain and continue along this super secret, amazing trail.
So something Angel and I were researching and trying to figure out, and I think it might be in this area. Of course, I could be wrong, and if I am wrong, I welcome any feedback to where they think the actual location may be. But looking at some old maps that were renamed and re-nicknamed with roads and different historical sites on Staten Island by William T. Davis, there was a British garrison fort somewhere along this section of Tourette where the golf course is above us, of course, and the multi-purpose trail. And this British garrison was designed because it overlooked Richmond Creek, which, as Angel mentioned, was on the left-hand side of this trail. And because this was a big waterway for trade, the British can watch and guard the waterway from any rebel ships or any other potential threats coming in to Staten Island from places afar. And so at this point, forest secession has overgrown and covered wherever that outlook is. But I know the Staten Island Museum used to utilize it as a historical heritage site. And you can hear somewhere either a hawk or a blue jay mimicking a hawk is calling.
We're watching them. They're two hawks playing with each other just beyond the trees. And they are headed over to Brookfield Park that we will talk about in a little while.
It seems like birds today are our guardian ambassadors and guides through this trip.
Well, they're trying to help us find that old Revolutionary War fort, I think.
And another component that makes me think it's over here is that blown out section of the multi-purpose trail, which is coming down from what looks like a spring. And so if you were a British military strategist, right, and you want to set up a fort, you would think just like we do today, what are all the components of habitat? What do we as people need to be able to sit and watch and guard? And we need food, we need water, shelter, and space. So we know that Ketchum Spring is over here, so that tells us that we're in the area not only of that old outlook, but also within the area that Ketchum Mill was built on. Because even though today we're looking at this big field of Phragmites and Richmond Creek and Brookfield Park, this would have looked much different when it was a booming water corridor for industry.
I'd like to make a little shout out to Sabrina Sab out there, who correctly answered the $1 million question. Yes, you are correct. Those were the tracks and the trail of the white-tailed deer. So congratulations, and thanks for answering the question. I had also learned in my research of St. Andrew's Church, where we started this program, that the church was actually used as a hospital for British troops during the Revolutionary War as well. And that's before there was a big fire in the church. It sustained huge damage, and they actually rebuilt it with those beautiful field stones that you see there now. And a fun fact, if you were to do a little bit of research on St. Andrew's Episcopalian Church, you would come up with a lot of paranormal information and websites listing it as a location for potential ghostly occurrences, which makes sense considering its long history, especially as a hospital to British troops. And that cemetery, actually, I don't know if anyone noticed on the walk through, but there's actually a pet cemetery in the back as well. So spirits of all different sorts of species live in there. We start to see the blowout and the rubble of stones, that many of which have this nice light pale green color to them, which tells me that some of them are in fact native stones to Staten Island, coming from the serpentine bedrock that is unique to our geographical landscape, that is literally the backbone of Staten Island.
While reading an article in the Advance written by Clay Wolney, who was talking about the serpentine rock here and sort of the geological history of the edge of Richmond Creek. We know that big chunks of Staten Island are geologically connected to sections of North Africa. So when the continents were breaking apart, Staten Island and North America went in one direction while Africa and Europe went in another. But it's really awesome to think about that sort of common family history regarding the stone and geology of Staten Island, and how the same matter that exists in the mountains of North Africa are present here on Staten Island.
Yeah, there's so much in what you just said. It really makes me think of a lot of different things, but definitely about the connectedness of people and land, and how sometimes, especially during these times, it can feel like we're kind of alone and very separate from even our closest people, and especially from people across the planet. But there are those very basic fundamental connections that still hold us together, because the land remembers everything and still connects us all. So I find some real beauty in there. And it kind of reminds me of like when people get their ancestry tracked and they learn, oh wow, I actually have this ancestry that I had no idea about. You know, it really it opens up people's kind of perspectives and horizons to how connected they are to people that they may never have known that they were.
So Angel, as you're looking out over Richmond Creek and the Brookfield Park, which is on the sort of the far edges of this view, if you imagined we were here in the 1700s, what do you think we would see?
Well, I think that, let me take a minute and put myself there. I think we'd see more water, for sure. I think that there would be less of these really aggressive growths of Phragmites, probably none of them, actually. These would have been probably very healthy salt marshy areas that were very important to help transport the different aquatic animals from one place of the island or one part of the city to another. We may hear some of the same sounds, though. Probably not that airplane. What do you think you'd see?
So I as well see the absence of Phragmites, and I imagine some salt marsh grasses in there. I imagine some of these trees along the edge might not have been here. I think there would have been quite a different, like, riparian zone. That area between the land and the water, I think, would look a little different. I think instead of the people on our right hiking on the multi-purpose trail, there might be a carriage. I might hear a horse neighing and the sound of wooden wheels along old stone. I imagine that there might be some barges and some activity in this section of Richmond Creek. I can almost hear young adolescent kids playing near the water's edge, maybe fishing, maybe poking at fiddler crabs.
It's possible that we could have heard that 11:30 church bell, though. They may have had a bell at that time still, and I think that's a really cool thought, that there are some of these sounds of modern life that may transcend that huge time barrier. And we've mentioned Brookfield Park a few times now as we continue to look over into that really picturesque direction. Many people probably know the history of Brookfield Park. I think a lot of people don't know that what we're actually looking at right on the other side of the creek was in the 1970s an extremely poorly managed solid waste dump site, similar to Fresh Kills, run by the City of New York Department of Sanitation. And those rolling hills that you see they were a landfill. And so very similar again to the process at Fresh Kills Park of capping those mounds. Brookfield Park received many millions of dollars for this major project to return this land to a more manageable and healthy kind of place. So they dropped I see a great blue heron actually flying right out of Richmond Creek at Brookfield right now, as some evidence of what we're talking about, where they realized that there was this huge issue. There was illegal dumping happening there, just a huge major problem that I encourage you all to look into, because these historical facts are really important to know where we came from, to know where we want to go. We can make those decisions. So many someones made the decision to put about 4 million tons of soil, topsoil, on top of all of Brookfield Park and plant native grasses, native trees, native shrubs. So they have cottonwoods and corkscrew willows, some pine trees. I think it's actually 16,000 plant species, or not different species, but 16,000 plants and like 76,000 trees, or maybe the other way around. But with the help of scientists and urban and city planners, they have put so much effort into reclaiming that space and not allowing the deep, dark history to dictate what it's going to be in the future. So now it's a really beautiful space with lots of trails for biking and walking and running, a home for visiting migratory birds, marshy birds, and great blue herons like we just saw. And it's also the second command for the Urban Park Rangers on Staten Island. Most people probably know that you can find them out of Blue Heron Park, out in Eltingville. But they're also here, so you can probably sign up for one of their guided hikes through Brookfield Park. I know they love the place where they are working out of, and they have so much more information to share with you if you're more curious about the history of that park and the diverse species living there now. And every once in a while we happen upon large collections of stones out here. And your imagination can go wild if you have no real historical context for what may have happened out here. But large stones like that imply to me some sort of perhaps property line, maybe. Maybe a fallen structure, which you would find multiples of along this trail.
As I'm walking on this earth, I'm starting to think about reviewing one of the soil surveys that were conducted here in the Greenbelt, and thinking about when you look at those geological maps and you just see the diversity in the soil just within this little corridor Angel and I are sitting in right now. There's areas where it's extremely sandy and loamy, and it's something like 60 inches deep before you hit that serpentine bedrock. And then as you go up further and that substrate changes from that sandy, loamy, peaty stuff that exists down below, you get something because of glacial till and different formations of the earth where that 60 inches then changes to something like 12 inches of organic matter before you hit that bedrock. And that's something that just sort of made me think a little bit about the plants that live here, the animals that live here, and then why there's those certain structures and those certain industries that thrived for a period of time right in this area.
There's a great view of Brookfield.
Oh, there's a beautiful woodpecker. If you can see it, it's on the edge of the top of this branch.
I don't see it.
Right,
Oh, there it
there's
is.
the one.
I hear Canada geese. Oh. We just passed by, and I focused on it for a few moments there, a white birch or paper birch grove below, kind of like a step down on the earth, as Chris was talking about the serpentine bedrock. And it's interesting when you see a grouping of the same species of plant in the same area, and it makes me wonder what happened here. Why'd this happen? Why did all of these white birch trees grow in this one area when I have literally not seen a single other white birch tree? And I had learned a couple years ago that those trees are some of the first plants that will anchor themselves in a burned area of the landscape. So for whatever reason, they do really great with the nutrients that have been created from what the fire transforms. But I had also learned that one of the really important and influential environmental groups on Staten Island, the Protectors of Pine Oak Woods, had also been in this area and know quite a deal about the history of this space and this kind of spit of land. And they had actually done some plantings of birch trees and pitch pine trees. And if you hang on with us for just a couple more minutes, then you will also be able to enjoy the really awesome shift in landscape from what we're looking at here. We're looking at an old broken down cinder block structure under wineberries and mugwort, lots of bittersweet vines, very open, not too many trees, and we'll be entering into the pine forest, which is a very different feeling.
So something I started appreciating in the process of preparing for the scenic perspective for all of you was the tradition and idea about storytelling. So we've acknowledged that traditionally this was the homeland of the Lenape before their displacement, and the Lenape would utilize spoken word and storytelling to pass down stories about the land, traditions, skills. And I sort of felt a lot of that when I was reaching out to individuals like Seth Wolney and Clay Wolney, thinking about information I gathered from Howie Fisher during one of our interview virtual programs, and how it's important that Angel and I right now are sharing these stories and this history with you all, because that generational knowledge will only continue. The exploration of those secret places will only continue if you all at home share this information that you get from Angel and I, just like we're sharing it from the folks we got it from, and those individuals who worked at the Staten Island Museum or were Greenbelt educators in the 1970s and 80s, they shared that knowledge with us. And we can inform the next generation about these secret places on Staten Island, and in turn fostering in them a sense of responsibility and care. Because when I came out here and I saw this big cement block, I had no idea what it was for. In my head I started asking questions. Well, if there's concrete and cement, was it part of the mill? Was it part of a British fort? But they weren't using cement then. So I had to do some research and ask around. And because there were folks that walked these paths before us that asked these same questions, we're able to connect to those former generations. And so what I learned was that this foundation, this structure was used by industry, because what they were doing is behind us where Richmond Creek exists, they were actually dredging sand and gravel and substrate out of the creek, and they were bringing it up here, and they were putting it in this foundation in order to dry out. And at first I'm like, so why would they be drying out sand? What would be the use of that? And so I learned, based on some of the industry that existed here on Staten Island related to brick making, cement making, that this was where they would add value to that sand by drying it out before it went to market. So it could be sold in bulk to organizations and companies that make that resource, that make that product for building bridges, for building homes, for building highways. But again, if nobody was passing down that story and that information, we wouldn't know that today. And so now that you know, that's going to be your legacy, to pass on that important information about what this space looked like during the Lenape in the Eastern Woodlands time period, after their forced remove by early settlers, the growth of the Industrial Revolution, the establishment of the landfill, the founding of the Greenbelt, and all these other amazing keystone moments in our shared history.
As I'm sure everyone can tell, we have entered a new part of our landscape here along this trail. We can tell because it's darker. The sun is not really able to get through parts of this canopy because we are now in this pine grove that we mentioned a little bit earlier. And walking on pine needles is a totally different experience than walking on hard soil. It makes me want to take my shoes off and really enjoy it. As far as I can tell, these are pitch pine trees. And if you can see what we're looking at along the bark, that is the sap of the pine tree, also known as pitch. And so that sap has had lots of different uses with Native Americans and early settlers alike, making glues and things like that. It's a boiling process and adding some other components like maybe charcoal dust or ash or something like that to harden it. And these trees they are evergreens, and their needles help you identify the tree. So in the different clusters called fascicles, you're going to find 3 pine needles to a cluster. And from what I learned in my research, they grow about a foot a year, which is pretty amazing, up until about 40 or 50 years old, when they start to kind of slow down in their extreme growth. And then at about 90 years old, they've pretty much stopped growing. So maybe there are some people out there who have been hiking in this area for decades. I don't know. If you had seen these trees 20 years ago, were they about as tall? How can we read this landscape and know how old these trees are? A big component of that is, like Chris was saying, consulting with our elders, people who have been on this earth for longer and have those firsthand stories to tell. Maybe we even know the people who planted these trees. You can see here, this is like a scar. If you got a cut on your arm and started bleeding, that's pretty much what's happening here. Things like that can happen from human interventions. Maybe somebody was out here doing something they shouldn't have been doing. It's possible sometimes that another tree can fall and hit the trunk of a different tree and cause damage. With so many storms, that is definitely possible. And as we look down, we can see the Richmond Creek, which, as another fun fact, is the longest above ground creek in all of New York City, which used to also be so toxic that you could smell sewage off of parts of the tributaries of the creek. But the DEC came in with their Blue Belt program and have put so much incredible work into making the Richmond Creek, parts of it just absolutely pristine, and helping so many different species to reestablish themselves and travel from one part of the island to the other in healthy conditions. All right, I don't know what you think, Chris, but I think this is a really beautiful place to kind of leave our viewers with to start to sign off of this program. We thank you so much for joining us for this really beautiful day, unseasonably warm, considering the cold of the last few days, and this really beautiful view of what was very different in the 1700s, what was very different in the 1970s, and today is really quite beautiful. And we can appreciate and honor all of history and all of the impacts that people had, and know that we can always make things better if we have a vision for the future, and especially if we know the story of the past of this land. So thank you again for joining us for today's Scenic Perspectives program. another Greenbelt at Home program brought to you virtually from this very super secret unnamed official trail off of the multi-purpose trail behind St. Andrew's Church next to Brookfield Park. So if you can find yourself out here, you're amazing. You're just a perfect navigator. You can check out more of our programs from our calendar on sigreenbelt.org. We're also on Instagram at sigreenbelt. We have a YouTube channel at the Staten Island Greenbelt. And of course, you can find us out in the park as well. So we hope you're staying safe and healthy, having a wonderful new year, and we can't wait to see you out on the trails.